Hello, welcome to the podcast, There Is No Spoon. Do you agree with the popular phrase, show me your friends, and I'll show you your future? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, let's take a look at this question through the lens of psychologist Jordan Peterson. As a reminder, we're continuing our discussion of his 12 rules for life. And today, we've come to rule number 3. Peterson formulates his third rule as a call to action. Make friends with people who want the best for you. As with the previous rules, a literal reading doesn't fully convey all the ideas the author expresses. Moreover, I found the discussion somewhat compressed, so I'll take the liberty of expanding on some aspects of this chapter in more detail. The first idea, which seems fairly simple to understand but less obvious to fully realize, is the importance of recognizing the starting conditions you have in terms of your environment. Some psychologists, notably the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, place special emphasis on the early stages of personality development. And it's not only followers of Freud. This idea is present in other psychological schools as well. For example, in the work of Jungian analyst James Hollis, the influence of the past on personality is clearly traced. In more empirical branches of psychology, like behaviorism, the role of early development also carries significant weight. Personally, I'm not inclined to think that the past determines our actions in the present, at least not when I'm reasoning outside the strict boundaries of contemporary science. But denying the impact of early experiences would be foolish. When a child takes their first steps into the world, they learn from the examples available to them. At first, this is of course their parents and relatives. Then, peers come into play, in kindergarten, at school, and so on. During this phase of development, thoughts, patterns, and behaviors aren't consciously examined. They're simply absorbed. The mechanism is simple. We copy what we see and observe the results to decide whether we like them. This naturally leads to the behavior of teenagers and young adults largely mirroring the patterns of the environment they grew up in. What interests us here, though, is the broader context of relationships with other people. And here, we see another pattern. If someone has interacted with a particular social stratum or group throughout their childhood, the values of that group become familiar and intuitive, while the values of other groups feel foreign, incomprehensible, and therefore possibly even threatening, especially if the world is viewed as an unfriendly place. So when this person enters adulthood and begins to choose friends or communities, they gravitate toward the same behavioral patterns they grew up with. Peterson asked, what held us back? What made us stop even wanting to seek out better friends or improve our situation? Maybe it wasn't just a choice, but the result of who we are, our temperament, past trauma, or unseen struggles. People differ deeply. Some are driven, others passive, some calm, others anxious. Add illness, and the weight gets heavier. Change isn't equally easy for everyone. Undoubtedly, there are institutional forces that can disrupt this pattern. Universities, for example, where the average level of motivation and cognitive engagement tends to be higher, can challenge previous assumptions. The same applies to professional environments, especially in highly skilled industries. Even with ingrained behavioral patterns, being regularly exposed to new models may cause a person to rethink their values and make a conscious choice in favor of another group. This is often referred to informally as social mobility. However, those older patterns don't disappear. That's why some highly accomplished individuals may still have people in their circle who clearly don't match their level of development. Sometimes this serves them well, offering a broader view of the world through the lens of different value systems. But other times, these people simply drag them down. Here, Peterson asks a crucial question. Why do people stick with friends who are not good for them? There are several answers to this, and they're extremely valuable for self-reflection. One answer we've already touched on: the power of habit and early learning. It's hard to suddenly change your identity, to welcome chaos into your life. It's easier to go with the flow in familiar surroundings. At first glance, what's the harm? If it's comfortable, why change? But Peterson rightly points out that this position is essentially infantile. You keep spending time with people who aren't helping you grow, not because it's good for anyone, but because it's the path of least resistance. Deep down, you all know it. There's this unspoken pact between you. Don't question it, don't aim higher, just go along with whatever's easy right now. No one says it out loud, but by avoiding the hard conversations, you're all silently choosing short-term comfort over long-term meaning. And even though no one talks about it, everyone feels what's happening. A slow drift into emptiness and regret. In essence, this mindset echoes Timon and Pumbaa's Hakuna Matata from The Lion King. The danger of this mindset is that it constantly pulls you backward. It acts as a persistent force that resists all the progress you've made. You have to overcome it every day just to stay in place, let alone grow. It becomes a constant, unconscious reminder of who you once were and what you supposedly deserve. As a result, destructive patterns from the past creep back into your life, often with harmful consequences. At some point, you have to ask yourself, is this still right for me? Is this good for me? Would I make the same choices today that I made as a child? Another reason we stick with people who are not good for us is more psychological, the savior complex. Peterson writes, people choose friends who aren't good for them for other reasons too. Sometimes it's because they want to rescue someone. This is more typical of young people, although the impetus still exists among older folks who are too agreeable, or have remained naive, or who are willfully blind. Someone might object, it is only right to see the best in people. The highest virtue is the desire to help. But not everyone who is failing is a victim, and not everyone at the bottom wishes to rise, although many do, and many manage it. Nonetheless, people will often accept or even amplify their own suffering, as well as that of others, if they can brandish it as evidence of the world's injustice. Peterson makes an important caveat, which I agree with 100%. None of this is a justification for abandoning those in real need to pursue your narrow, blind ambition, in case it has to be said. In other words, each situation is unique and must be considered in the context of the individual's personal story. The choice is always yours, but it should be a conscious and informed one, not dictated by old scripts from the past. Now let's move from causes to consequences. If we're being pragmatic, what's the real harm in having such people around? Peterson offers a clear answer: unconscious, or worse, conscious envy. He writes, then you unsettle others, because deep down they know that their cynicism and inertia aren't justified. You become able to their cane. You remind them that they refuse to act, not because life is full of undeniable horrors, but because they didn't want to shoulder the burden of the world, even though that's where it belongs. Let me expand on that with a few additional ideas. Another explanation, like attracts like. As Christ said, by their fruits you shall know them. People who are consistently not good generate a field around them, a kind of negative gravitational pull. This is where we could invoke Kurt Lewin and his field theory. Anyone who enters that field picks up on the disempowerment and feels a subtle drag on their own efforts. Note, I'm not talking about people who occasionally hit rough patches. Life is unpredictable. But we usually can tell when someone's in a temporary crisis versus when this is their lifestyle. A third reason has to do with growth zones. When we're around people who are developing and achieving, we start to absorb that too. We begin to grow. Jung observed that no psychologist can take their client further than they've gone themselves. This principle applies to all relationships. Strong relationships enrich both sides, not just in daily life, but at the level of intentions, goals, and values. Good relationships look toward the future, without ignoring the present, while bad ones constantly pull you back. There's also a fourth reason, very pragmatic, yet deeply relevant. When we've had a particularly negative or painful experience with a not-so-good person, we begin projecting that experience onto others. This is the so-called inductive fallacy. When I conducted research on situations involving innocent suffering, one of the hardest findings was this. People who went through such experiences often had to construct complex psychological defenses just to survive. In adults, those defenses often take the form of cynicism, pragmatism, or self-centeredness. Whether that's good or bad is up to each individual. But my view is more idealistic. Meaningful relationships operate on a deep, non-rational level. That doesn't mean they're irrational, but trying to rationalize them too much strips away their essence. When someone adopts a defensive strategy rooted in cynicism or egoism, they essentially shut themselves off from deeper relational experiences. Can anything meaningful be built on that foundation? And does everyone even want that kind of depth? That's an open question. But to me, the answer is obvious. So I agree with Peterson's conclusion. Make friends with people who want the best for you. This was the podcast, There Is No Spoon. Until next time.